Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where we're going to put our property experts to test, answering your property related questions. Our experts today, joining me today, are Richard Murray, CEO of Eurolink Technology, suppliers of Vico software. Welcome to you, Richard. Good
Hi.
to have you back.
Thanks a lot.
And somebody new to Property Question Time, Jack Roberts, CEO of SlothMove, property tech innovators. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
We'll try and be gentle first time.
I appreciate it.
Don't worry. Richard, you're going to go first. So your question is this. I have a small buy-to-let portfolio and now wish to add some commercial property to my holdings. When I first entered the industry, many of the residential agencies I bought from offered terrific guidance and advice. I have not, however, experienced the same level of support from commercial agents I've approached. Is this normal in the commercial sector, or have I just been unlucky? Can the experts point me in the right direction for general advice in the commercial world? Now, I know this is right up your street because apart from being a software supremo, you're also a commercial investor, I think, Richard.
Yes. Well, I think to answer the tech part of that question, I think I don't know what Jack thinks this, but if the UK property sector is slow at adopting technology, then I think commercial agents are the top of that list.
Okay.
And that's not necessarily a criticism. It's just more a case of it's more of a B2B environment. It's more relationship built. It's more a case of, if you took, I don't know, if I said to the average investor, do you know who Rightmove and Zoopla are? They're going to say yes straight away. Whereas if I said, LoopNet, they're going to go, maybe, might have heard of it. So I just think, and again, it's just the difference between that sort of B2C.
Isn't it a little bit like in the financial world, you have what you call sophisticated investors, and therefore it is a little bit more peer-to-peer, isn't it?
I think a lot more peer-to-peer, and as I said, relationship driven. I mean, in my experience, I find that agents tend to work off the same list of available properties and active applicants. And they're sharing fees, and it really is a case. My recommendation would be to find yourself a network, build some strong relationships, get comfortable with the sort of person you want to work with, and then I think you're going to be in the market. Then you're going to be, as I said, on that list. You're going to be having the same sort of property opportunities shared. I think it's more about relationships really than someone would probably be used to in the resi sector.
Well, that's quite an interesting subject, Richard, because Jack and I were talking just off camera before the show, and we were talking about, the reluctance today with some people to actually have real conversations, to have real contact. It's okay doing everything by email or text or WhatsApp or whatever, but I think in this case I'd say get around some commercial agents, walk in the door, see if you meet somebody that you get on with and that you can communicate with, and you'd probably find a lot of doors opening that way.
I think that would definitely be the best advice. I would also recommend thinking about and doing some research on what type of commercial property you're interested in. Retail for me is not something I've ever got involved in. I just don't feel comfortable in that space. It doesn't work for me personally as an investor. However, the flip side of that, if you're looking at office space and distribution units or warehousing, just be aware of things, potential pitfalls. For example, one of the big ones is that you are, as a landlord, you are liable for business rates during voids. Now, that's something that might not be so obvious to everyone, but actually it can leave a big hole in your cash flow. So I would recommend baking in some contingency for things like business rates if that's the route you're going down.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, again, you touched on a very good point there. So when people say to me, oh, what about the property market? Well, which bit are you talking about? I mean, it's so wide, so complex. And again, in the commercial world, there are so many different sectors. You mentioned retail, office space, it could be warehousing, all sorts of things. So again, you're not going to build a relationship with people unless you're very clear on which way you're intending to go, I think.
Absolutely. And some landlords are accidental landlords in commercial property. So in our, from my tech hat on and looking at software, we're on the resi side, we have to cater for commercial property, because someone might have a flat and a retail unit underneath, or 4 flats and 2 retail units underneath, and it's bought as a package.
You can't say, oops, I don't do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's, I think, that's another, just another thing to consider, that you may become an accidental landlord of commercial property.
Yeah, okay. Anything to add to that, Jack?
No, I think it's summarised perfectly.
Good, okay, all right. Well, we'll move on to your question now, Jack. As someone in my late 20s that has moved house several times, I'm always shocked that in a time where I can pay for my coffee with my phone, simply moving all my utilities and amenities from one house to another is very difficult, and I suppose costly too sometimes in terms of time. Why is this, and why is nobody doing anything about this, or are they? Which I think opens the door nicely for you and your business, I think.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. It's right, you can do literally everything on your phone, but when it comes to moving home, for some reason, it just feels a lot more complex. And funnily enough, like you said, like, we really sit in this specialism as a business. Now, the problem that we have when you're moving home, the biggest time-consuming part of people is typically at the point of move. So it takes around 15 to 16 hours to do all the kind of admin associated with moving. And traditionally, that's also done through things like phoning businesses, emails, chats, all that sort of stuff. So, there are organizations that are popping up that solve those sorts of problems for consumers and give them time back through what is traditionally quite a very time-consuming and stressful thing. I think actually moving home is listed as, I think, the 3rd most stressful thing that an individual can do next to divorce and redundancy. So the UK is a market that I think it's worth pointing out is, from a relocation technology perspective, is slightly behind some other sort of geographies, like the US for it is a good example. So we are lagging behind, but I think there are those sort of streams of innovations and new businesses that are coming through and making waves and kind of pushing, the sort of envelope in that sense to make moving quite simple.
Okay. I mean, just going back to your particular skills and company activities, I can quite see you've got the services, you've got your gas, electric, your water, that sort of thing. That can be time consuming in itself, because especially these days, the electric companies and gas companies are not that easy to communicate with, are they? Bitter experience here. But would you handle somebody, for instance, if you've got, I don't know, half a dozen credit cards, for instance, would they fall into the remit of your services?
Yes, so our service basically, instead of having 21 different conversations with 21 different suppliers, essentially use one online form, and then you update your address simultaneously with everybody. So that sits across governmental organizations, utility companies, banks, credit cards, essentially every organization you need to update, consolidating that into one simple 3-minute sort of journey, as opposed to literally 15 hours worth of conversations.
Okay, I'm just thinking of the complexities of data protection and government departments. Is there any resistance to your service from those departments in terms of, well, sorry, you're not the principal, so we're not going to take it from you?
Yeah, and data protection I think is super important, and it's got to be the critical part of the business. But essentially I think if you can validate who the individual is, you can obtain consent, you can capture signature, you can validate that individual, and actually work with the businesses to validate that person. The address change in that sense is kind of facilitated by that business. And what we find speaking to different organizations actually is that they don't want lots of customers on the phone speaking to individuals, because the OPEX associated with doing that isn't necessarily a net margin contributing activity. Therefore, they prefer to streamline that and make it a lot easier to sort of be a customer moving with them.
Right. Okay. Well, I think with your agency contacts, Richard, you've probably got something to add to this.
I think the great thing about Jack's business is it's solving a problem, an actual problem that exists. A lot of, and then again, I think you hit the nail on the head. Again, we are slow adopters of prop tech. Simple as that. We have been for the last few decades, to be honest. But it's great to see a business that solves problems, because we do try and solve problems that don't exist.
Yeah.
Real problems.
Yeah.
And again, if you're talking about that type of saving at that type of time in your life,
it's a very difficult thing, isn't it? If you've got a fairly busy business life or employment life, then all these things need to be done within office hours, really, don't they? And that's quite disruptive, or it can be. But I'm sure this is something that's going to get worked into your agency software at some point.
Already going through my mind, Stephen. Already going through my mind.
Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break, when we'll be asking Jack and Richard more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Richard Murray and Jack Roberts. Welcome back, guys. Richard, your second question. We've now seen the effectiveness or not of online-only agents over the last 10 to 15 years and the dominance of the property portals in the marketing of residential properties. Do the experts think that a national portal with direct access for vendors will ever replace the conventional and current marketing paths?
That's a big question. I think we tend to follow US trends, typically. And probably the best example of that would be Zillow. I think is probably the best example. So they've been doing a for sale by owner model for many, many years.
Okay.
They pitch themselves, I think they pitch themselves as an advertising company, but they've created a property marketplace. That's their pitch. It's a property marketplace. You can trade all things property on our platform. But the for sale by owner specifically is something that's been going for a number of years now. I think the closest thing we've had to something that might go down that route was the Bruce Brothers Boomin portal. Now, obviously, that hasn't worked. There's lots of reasons why it didn't work, but essentially, they were trying to create a marketplace, somewhere where lots of traffic, and we know a lot of traffic that goes to the Rightmoves and the Zooplas and the On the Markets. A lot of that traffic is browsing. It's that sort of, what can you do with that type of?
I think it's called tire kicking.
Tire kicking, browsing, but actually that is a user of your site. And I think the booming concept was to try and drag that person in and make them part of it, because actually they might not buy a property or rent a property on that occasion, but they might be considering home improvements. They might be looking for services, goods or services that are property related. So I kind of understood the concept. And I thought that in the back of my mind, I thought, these guys aren't adverse to a bit of controversy or being a challenger or being a disruptor. But then that brings me to Purple Bricks, and it brings me round to again, let's call that the hybrid of the for sale by owner. Is that fair to say? An online only agent where you as a vendor can go, you've got a different structure of paying your fee. That concept just hasn't taken off. Originally, I've talked on these programs before about the stats, but the basic statistic really that makes the most sense in this example is these original pitch decks and these original funding rounds were based on a 50% market share of these online agencies. I mean, I went on record at the time saying, no way, just can't see it happening. I don't think the UK is ready for it. And I said something around the 15 to 20% mark might be more realistic, but we were both completely wrong. I think it peaked at 6%. It's currently at 4%. Now that says to me that vendors in the UK are not comfortable selling their home themselves, doing their own viewings, using an online agency. For whatever reason, the Americans, might be a confidence thing, it might be a cultural thing, but obviously are far more comfortable listing their own property and essentially selling their own property via a technology platform. I just don't, we know we're not ready for that because the onliners haven't had the impact that they thought they'd have in the industry. I think the short answer is I just don't see it happening.
Look, I've been in property many, many years, and I've always been taught that it's actually the sales progression that is the key to all this. And it seems to me that this is where the online agencies fall short. I don't want to criticise any particular company, but there is that weakness in the progression. It's relatively, I've been a partner in surveyors companies that have had agency arms, and it's very clear to me that, in the good times, all you need is order takers. In the bad times, you really need skilled people who can actually achieve a sale, progress it through to completion. And it's very, very hard. The balance is very hard. I mean, and again, from a commercial point of view, you've always got this issue. You've either got too many properties coming out your ears and you can't get rid of them fast enough, or you've got no instructions and you're struggling because the market's so hot they don't need you. Very difficult to strike the balance, and I'm not sure an online agent is able to create that balance. They don't have the facility for going in and having a chat, for talking about selling or buying what's probably going to be your biggest ever purchase throughout your life. It's going to be very difficult.
And local expertise as well. I think there's a distinct lack of genuine local expertise, and that's where estate agents, for me, that's where they win. That local expertise, that high level of expertise. And I know they I think a lot of the time estate agents are unfairly criticised. I'm going to say that because a lot of them, they're clients of mine. But I think when you see behind the scenes, like we get the chance to, you see the work that goes in. And I think you've hit on a great point there, Stephen, that sales progression, for me, should be the thing that is promoted by those local property experts, because that is where they earn their fee, believe me.
Well, I think you're right. I was in partnership with a very, very good developer at one stage, and he always used to say, you cannot survive in this industry without your local agents. And I said, what do you mean? And it comes back to this sales progression. It's not all just about phoning the solicitor up and pestering him every Friday about why you haven't exchanged or whatever. It's little things. Where's the valuer going to go to get his comparables to make your property fundable? He's going to go to the local agent. So if you've distanced yourself from that agent, if you've criticised them or you're not going to get the right answers. It's as simple as that. And so it's quite an all-encompassing thing, this sort of sales progression. Do you agree with that?
I do, and I think that the whole property transaction is so many intermediaries through moving home, right? And as we see with many industries, if there's a third party or additional links in the chain that aren't fundamentally adding value to that process, they'll just get eroded away over time. So the question is, I think, for typical consumer that's buying or selling or moving is, does this individual, does this agency add enough value to justify and give me return on investment? So if they can get you a higher property price or expedite the process somewhat, then the value's there. And it could be, like you say, thinking about America and the US, is it a cultural thing, is it a traditional thing? But actually people seem to still believe, based on the data, that actually paying an individual to support in that process is preferable.
I think you're right. Okay, Jack, we'll move on to your second question. I'm moving house and I'm very worried about energy costs of my new property. Are there any opportunities in regard to energy companies when you move house, or any tips on how to help secure the lowest rates available? And that's such a touchy subject these days, isn't it? I mean, trying to get an electric company to even talk to you is quite a problem.
Hard work.
Yeah. So,
and I definitely hear that question. At SlothMove, we get it all the time, so many individuals asking about energy. So I think what's worth probably calling out first of all is that what most people don't realise when you move home is that you don't take your energy supply with you. You actually inherit the provider at that particular property and you're placed on a deemed contract. Now, traditionally outside of the current kind of climate, obviously you've got the high energy price of Ukraine and whatnot, you would be on a quite expensive bill, and it would always be an incentive to switch. But what we see at the moment in the market is that the whole switching process has slowed down quite a lot. There are lots of energy companies that aren't necessarily taking people on. So if you're looking to minimize your energy expenditure, you can do that by leveraging two sort of levers. The first one I'd say is the price per unit that you pay. The second one is your consumption. So it could be things like heat proofing your home or just not minimizing your wastage. I think typically you're going to get a better return at the moment by thinking about how you reduce your consumption down, thinking about that side of things. And hopefully over the next sort of 3, 6, 9 months, the energy switching market starts to open up. I think it's important to be diligent and always checking online to see what you can get in terms of best price comparison to reduce your unit cost. But at the moment, the market is just in a really difficult place, and we see more people going into energy poverty as a result of it, and it's sort of really difficult for quite a lot of people at the moment.
Yeah. So typically when you move house, as you say, you leave your supplier behind, you inherit the new supplier at the new property. Are those people at the new property resistant to taking you on? Do they look at the end of the contract as a bit of relief and sort of just turn it off?
Yeah, well, energy suppliers typically, I think, love moving home in one sense because it's a great opportunity to acquire a new customer, but it's the data veracity, which is a real issue. Who's moved in? Where's my supplier gone? We don't know where Mrs. Higgins has gone to. Where is she? She owes us lots of money. So that kind of bridging the gap in the communication piece for those companies and helping them understand where they've gone to is super important. But I think moving home is a great opportunity generally to kind of review all your expenditures and your sort of broadband energy to make sure you're paying the right sorts of money.
Yes. And do you think that's going to get easier this year?
If I could tell you for certain, we could make a lot of money from it. But I'd like to think that over the next 6 to 9 months, it progresses to a better position. But I think we're expecting the prices to keep increasing. But the truth is, we don't really know for sure.
I think gas prices are coming down, aren't they, a little?
Yeah, I mean, there's been fluctuations in government policy. You know, I think is constantly revising, subject to what we're seeing with those prices. So it's very difficult to predict into the future.
And I think we're heading in a couple of months to the end of the government subsidy on electric costs, aren't we? Is that going to cause a problem?
Well, I think people need support, not just with energy, but general cost of living and inflationary sort of forces have made it very difficult. So I think the government needs to be really on thinking about how we can support people better with that.
Right. Well, on that happy note, that's all we've got time for in today's show. So big thank you to Richard Murray and to Jack Roberts. Great answers to your questions. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.